Welcome to Series 5 of the Lawyers Coach podcast. My name is Oliver Hansard, and each episode of this podcast will feature myself or Claire Rayson, both of us coaches and former lawyers, trying to find out what makes lawyers tick. In this series, we will be hearing from various guests and experts, exploring the skills that lawyers need to succeed. And then, at the end of each episode, we will both be reflecting on what they said. The Lawyers Coach podcast is brought to you by Client Talk and Hansard Coaching. In this episode, Claire Rayson and I had the pleasure of speaking to Nicola Jones, who's founder and CEO of Athena Professional. Claire started by asking Nicola how she became involved in the legal profession in the first place.
I am the daughter of lawyers. My dad was a criminal defence solicitor in the small town I grew up in before the duty solicitor situation existed. So my dad was out at the police station 2 or 3 times a night, most nights. So I grew up with the idea of access to justice and being an advocate for people generally as being sort of part of the way of life that I grew up with. I somewhat resisted going into law, possibly because both my parents are lawyers. And then I finally did start studying law after I'd done other things. And I took the conversion course, and I went to the Inns of Court School of Law, and I qualified as a barrister. I did pupillage in Birmingham, and I practiced in crime and family law for about 4 years. Then I had to reinvent myself. My first child was born very prematurely, and going back to being out of the house at 12, 14 hours a day wasn't really on the cards. So I went to work at the University of Warwick as Director of Legal Skills Training there. And that started me off on my path towards becoming doing what I do now, which is continuous learning, strategy and facilitation, design and coaching. So I'm really interested in the connection between individuals and their collective effort. And I also still have this very strong relationship with the idea that people need a voice in the judicial system. And I have a great deal of respect for the judicial system, imperfect as it is. So I stay engaged with that by being co-chair of Birmingham Law Society's Legal Technology Committee. And I work with lawyers routinely. I also have a limb of my work, which is working with regulatory bodies on investigatory skills. So I'm still very much engaged with the law, but from an observational perspective these days, on the outside looking in.
And the title, I mean, so many questions we can ask, but the title of this series is The Skills That Lawyers Need. Mm-hmm. And we've spoken to different guests who have come at this from different angles. From your perspective, what are the key skills that lawyers need?
Oh, where to start with that question? I think the enormous need is to be able to collaborate with others. I think that there is going to be a significant change in the way that legal services are consumed in the next couple of decades. And as a result of that, the capacity of lawyers to cover all the bases in the way that they historically have done is going to become much more compromised. And it's going to be vital to be able to work with allied professionals, be they IT professionals, be they marketing, be they things that legal design, for example, which is a job we didn't have, I think 3 or 4 years ago. We didn't talk about legal designers, and now we know what legal designers are, and we know how important it is that those people who consume legal services understand visually what it is they're getting involved in. So there's an evolution in the way that law is consumed, and lawyers have to keep pace with that. And the only way they can do that is to learn to collaborate. And what sits behind that is a host of other skills, which really start with self-awareness and awareness of impact on others, in order to really provide that client experience that we talk about now, putting themselves in the shoes of the person to whom they're providing the legal advice and guidance.
In terms of collaboration, I guess the question is around what gets in the way, or how can lawyers start on that journey? Because you mentioned there about lawyers being used to covering all the bases. And I think for all of us who've worked in the legal, environment, we're used to lawyers being the ones who, spin all the plates. They're the ones that people look up to. And as you said, the real shift, I think, at the minute in firms, I mean, Rhea spoke about business development skills, there being other experts that they need to turn to, that they need to collaborate with, and not just as a support, but as an equal. What do you think the first step is to try and get lawyers kind of on that journey?
I think awareness is crucial. I think for a long time in the sector, we've been talking about the fact that the platform is beginning to burn, and we're very used to the idea that the platform is beginning to burn. The pandemic has pushed us to the point where we can see actually what could occur. The current geopolitical situation is such that we can see that really stuff can change, really, really radically things can change. So that we've learned a lot in terms of our lived experience in the last few years. And that opens up the horizon, I think, for all sorts of different change. I think actually we're much further down that journey of change than most people give us credit for. We've been living in a bubble of comfort and privilege for a long time, and the world has moved on. We haven't quite noticed. And that means that we need to start by understanding our context. Maybe this is because my first degree is in history, but we need to understand our context. Who are we? What is our experience as a firm, together as a senior leadership team or as a cohort, and where are we intending to get to? And that level of awareness is crucial to identity. There's a famous historian who said, not to know what happened before you were born is to remain forever a child. It's a little bit like that in terms of firm identity. It's not to know what your firm exists for and how it serves its client base. Is not really, you don't really understand the identity of the business that you're engaged with. And then because that's essential to thinking about where it's going in the future. And we've got to get to a point where we are aware enough of the fact that we're engaged in a process that is changing rapidly. And that means changing our individual behaviours as well as looking to the organisation to create change and deliver change for us.
But there'll be so many senior lawyers just terrified of that change and find that really, really threatening. Be that IT, be that gender, be that different forms of delivering legal services. Where to start to overcome that fear?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of thoughts that come up about that. One is I think compassion is really important. It's important to have self-compassion and understand that that an individual can't be a singular answer. With that comes a dose of humility as well, that there is a context in which you play a part, and you can have agency and you can affect change, but there is a need to have that compassion and humility in order to begin that journey. And I think you're right, people are very frightened, actually. There's also a degree of self-interest in seeing out your term and taking your pension.
Oh, absolutely, without rocking the boat. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that's that is something that needs to be challenged. That does happen to some degree, but I think the boat's already rocking really hard. and that's one of the issues around awareness. I think we do need to understand that there's a lot at stake. There's a lot at stake for us as organisations, because there's a huge disruption potential. Okay, except that the disruption is, it's iterative and it's coming through marginally, and it perhaps isn't the tsunami that one could expect, but there will be a tipping point, and we're closer to that than we were. But also I think it's important to realise that we have to defend the rule of law, and it's not a trivial thing. And there is a very clear move towards big data hoovering up all processes, all services becoming digitised in ways that we can't even begin to relate to. And I'm not a technologist. I just have a sort of awareness of the beginnings of what the potential could be. And it's not not unreasonable to think that there could be a time when very large corporations own really all the meaningful information in the world. And that's not a fantasy, that's a very real prospect. They're not effectively regulated. They're not particularly accountable in any way. And it's possible that if they turn their attention to various different activities, they could take those over. And we know that the world is not the benign place that we'd like it to be. So, the rule of law and the fact that we follow the rules is really important. And we will find that we're much more vulnerable, and our democracy is much more vulnerable than we give credence for. So it really is time for individuals to be accountable for their commitment to the rule of law and to the role that they play in serving the court. And I do believe that that's what the purpose of law is for, and we need to get back in touch with that.
In terms of, you mentioned at the beginning about the connection between the individual and the collective, and all three of us are coaches, and self-awareness obviously forms a huge part of what we do as coaches, both on an individual level and on a team level. If I'm sat listening to this podcast and I think, okay, yes, as a firm, I think, I get it. I want to start to think about raising awareness in our firm of how we all are, how we act together. What's the first step, would you say, for firms? Because it's not, I think one of the things that's kind of resonated through the series is soft skills, and it's something, lawyers are quite, and I say that as a lawyer, we're all lawyers, quite comfortable with this is the law, this is the case law, go off and learn it. But when we start talking about things that are a little bit more subtle or a little bit more intangible, I think, again, people just don't know where to start. So what would your advice be?
I think the place to start is to understand the business itself. So understand its history and put yourselves on a timeline. See your collective identity on that timeline. How did you arrive? Very often people have never had that conversation. They've never sat down together and said, "Oh, well, when did you join the firm? Oh, yeah, did you, do you remember when X happened?" I did this work with a firm the other day, and it was revelatory. And we actually discovered the pattern of the recent history of the firm, and it gave them a great deal of courage and insight into their capacity to be commercially resilient and resourceful. And also, all the time, we're making the human connection, and we're learning, and we're building on the relationship, and we're learning about each other. It's a really powerful conversation to have, and it opens up the conversation about where you want to go together. And that is something that a lot of the time we don't really engage with, because we're sort of, if you like, down in the weeds in the day to day. And we haven't mentioned the billable hour, but there's the billable hour caning everyone over the head the whole time. We're in that morass of effort and work and energy. And then the request to start being resourceful about future thinking goes down like a lead balloon, doesn't it? It's like, get out of my hair, I'm busy. So actually inviting people to enjoy each other's company and to do something that means that they understand that they belong to something and that it has a future that they can shape. I think that's a really powerful starting point myself.
And you've talked about your belief of individuals being resourceful and adaptable. So does that make you optimistic then about, I suppose, humanity, but as we're talking about lawyers being able to change and adapt to the challenges ahead?
I think lawyers are smart people. They're intelligent. They're beautiful. They are. A lot of people would relish the opportunity to get back in touch with what brought them to the law in the first place. I asked that question of a group of not terribly senior associates the other day, and they simply couldn't answer me. They just, I think they'd forgotten, because they were so completely immersed in effort. They've forgotten what brought them to the law in the first place. And I think we should, we need to try and help people remember that and help them see that they can make a difference to people's lives. And the social, economic, and political importance of the work that lawyers do is indisputable. It's just that we're not really very in touch with it much of the time.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because one of, as we started this episode, we start all our episodes with, what made you want to become a lawyer in the first place? Why did you start becoming a lawyer? And it's interesting. I mean, some, because I didn't have anything else to do, or, some reasons perhaps not quite so profound as yours, but a number of people sharing thoughts around, actually, there were really strong drivers for me to go into the law, and they weren't that I wanted to end up in a corporate firm and make lots of money. The drivers were, I believe in fairness. I believe in speaking up for people who don't have a voice. I believe in justice. And as you say, you kind of get on that treadmill. You're no longer the idealistic 18-year-old who starts off their career, and you kind of lose sight of why you started on your own journey. You mentioned about the journey of a firm, but also your own journey.
Yeah, and there's a calibration there, isn't there, between the commercial and the value-driven piece. And I think that's somewhere where a lot of lawyers would just sort of get fed up with you talking about, purpose and the wider import of law. They just say, well, you're not being realistic. This is a business. I'm running a business to make money. That's not really going to wash in the 21st century. It's not going to wash with consumers who increasingly identify with the values of the organizations that they use. And I see examples of people being quite innovative and thoughtful. And it really comes down to the capacity to understand what client experience really is and what it means to be a consumer of the law. And I think that's the thing that requires a degree of empathy, and that begins with self-empathy and self-awareness, as you say. And I think that it all comes back to the individual and the individual's capability to understand how they show up in the world, and then how they connect with others to create meaningful shared purpose. It's not complex, except it is hugely messy and difficult. It's a simple idea, but it's incredibly hard to do. It's incredibly hard in ways which are not intellectually demanding. It's incredibly hard in ways which are behaviorally demanding. And that's where everyone gets a bit impatient, because they're, drumming their fingers on the table. They don't want to sit here and reflect on their own behavior. Thank you very much. They've got bills to get secured. So it's tough to get and keep attention and to embed ideas with law firms. Really tough.
Ollie, Nicola mentioned the empathy word there. I know you do a lot around empathy and with firms, so I'm sure you've got some reflections.
Yeah, well, I was waiting for that word to come through, and you talk about self-awareness, and I see that as kind of self-empathy. If you don't understand your own context, how can you understand anyone else's, even in particular your client's context? You need to understand that to be an effective lawyer. You talked about compassion and humility, and as you talk, I'm furiously agreeing with you. But what I'm struggling with is the connection between, and you alluded to it, compassion, humility, empathy, what you will, and the billable hour.
Oh yeah.
Does the latter need to change for the former to come through? How do we reconcile that?
You barely have a conversation about the future of law before for 5 minutes before you start talking about the fact that the billable hour is the biggest blocker that exists. A colleague collaborates with me called Barry Wilkinson, and he was saying the other day that the law is the only business in which inefficiency is rewarded. We know that, don't we? And we know the billable hour is really indefensible. It's clobbering the profession. It's preventing it from moving forward. I find it quite irritating and frustrating. I run a business. I have to cost things without knowing how much time and effort they're going to take. I appreciate there's a whole dynamic of risk, and there's a world of hurt in legal work, but there's ways around that. And it's not simple to change the model. It just isn't. But we have to be imaginative about that, because digital resources are coming, which will mean that you can't pretend that it takes you 5 hours to draft a contract anymore. Those resources, we've already got plenty of businesses that are offering template resources to clients, and that's what clients want to see. They want to, and they don't mind paying for the value clause, do they? They're willing to pay for the bit that is of value, but they're going to need to be treated as equals in terms of understanding the work that's done and being able to see where the value in the offering that lawyers make really is.
I think for me, it comes down to that collaboration piece that we were talking about as well, because, I know we've discussed this before, but I think, when what's rewarded in the firm is, the lawyers who are billing, those that support them and offer something of value to the client because they're not being billed for, that value isn't visible, it isn't seen. And actually to start to really leverage technology, project managers, legal designers, all of the other parts of the puzzle, the model needs to change.
Yeah, it does. I was speaking to a value pricing expert yesterday, and he was saying to me, "So what's getting in the way of value pricing?" And I was like, "Well, where should we start?" The individual driver that you are your target. So why would you value price? The organisational value and recognition that's placed only on the billable hour, not on any kind of activity. It's incredibly reductive, and it means that people have the capacity to engage with other kinds of behaviour or thought processes just really just driven out of them. It becomes a chase, doesn't it, to get the hours done, and that's a shame. That's a shame, because all that intelligence and creativity and capability is really effectively being organisationally squashed.
Ollie, you've been both in private practice and also client side. So what's your view on the billable hour? What do you see clients demanding?
It drives a client crazy to know that there's a particular task which they're certain has been done before by that law firm, and yet there's no sensible quote. It's crazy. You're much better off getting somebody in-house to do that work rather than just to rely on writing that blank check. So there's got to be innovative ways of dealing with these challenges. And if we don't start to really work hard to find those solutions, I think Nicola's right, that the industry will be in trouble. And part of me thinks it will come with time, as more technically savvy lawyers start to flow through, that maybe they'll see that change being necessary. But I just can't see. It almost limits clients' access to the law when all they know is that they don't know what they're going to pay for a particular service. And how could that, can that be good for the rule of law? So change really does need to come on that front, I believe.
What you're saying there, Ollie, it reminds me of when I first started my business, which is about human skills in the digital age, about 8 years ago. The LSB had just published a report that said that I think about, 13% of SME businesses felt that law offered them a cost-effective solution. I thought, oh, this is great. It's like this will be like shooting fish in a barrel, won't it? Because lawyers will have to understand that what they need to do is exercise empathy with the client's experience and towards themselves, and they'll have to collaborate and all of this stuff. Yeah, that was all water off a duck's back. But then, interestingly, last year, the Law Tech UK published a report in which they estimated that there's an £11.4 billion a year unmet legal need amongst SME businesses for exactly the reasons you just articulated, Ollie. Interestingly, they also said there's a £1.7 billion a year efficiency saving to be made in using legal tech. And actually, that's where lawyers tend to focus. They tend to focus their efforts on the efficiency, profitability. So we're sort of still chasing the billable hour in a way there, aren't we? We're still going with that model, and we're still saying, how profitable can we be? How profitable can we be? That's the driver. Actually, the bigger fish, the way bigger fish, is the unmet legal need, which is a much bigger conundrum and has so much more potential, and is actually so very important right now, in this particular moment in history when we have all sorts of change, the rise of these huge data-driven companies, the rise of authoritarianism and populism. We do need to just face into these challenges and see them for what they are, because they're very real. And if I may, can I add something, which is that I then thought about how much time do lawyers spend learning? Because that's my jam, is helping people to learn. And I couldn't find any stats on that. The Law Tech report says that about 1% of income is spent on R&D, when typically in other sectors it's 5%. But there was nothing there about learning, and there often isn't. Learning is a very, very poor cousin in law, possibly because most lawyers think they've done their learning and they don't need to do any more unless it's legal technical. But if you think about it, the CPD hour went in 2016, not something that a lot of lawyers are even aware of. And I figured if you say that a lawyer does a 40-hour week, which we know is a massive underestimate, and we say that they work 40 weeks a year, which is also an underestimate, but that gives us a 1,600-hour year, doesn't it? And it used to be the case they did 16 hours of CPD. 1% of their time was spent doing CPD, and most of that would have been on legal technical stuff. So all of these skills and all of this awareness and all this context that we've been talking about, there is literally no time to engage with that, to be curious about it, and to face into the challenges that we're talking about. It's just not catered for at an organizational level, and it will have to come. It's one of the key things that will have to come in the next 10 years, is we've got to get very serious about continuous learning, because it's the only way we can get real.
Do you think that's the starting point in terms of, I was about to say, for L&D teams listening, for firms listening, where to start? Is it trying to carve out that time and starting to put continuous learning higher up on the agenda?
It's strategic. It's a strategic use of learning. The first question I want to ask a firm when I go in is, what is your strategy? Now, that very often can't answer that question about learning because they've never thought about having a learning strategy. They probably have a business strategy, although nobody may have looked at it for a while. And largely it may not be widely understood. But we've got to the intention here is to think about outcomes and a strategic intention. So everything else follows from that. And once you think about that, you sort out your context, your purpose, you start to engage with what your strategic thinking is and what your plan can be. Then you start to be able to assess capability, and then you can look carefully at how to invest your time and money in developing skills that are really going to have an impact on your clients in your firm.
So many takeaways from the episode. What is the one takeaway that you want people to have?
You can't do it on your own. You've got to collaborate. You've got to tap into the expertise of many good people who can help, and you have to own the problem. So you're collaborating because you own the problem. The problem is, my clients are not understanding the quality of our service. My client is not experiencing the best service that they could. I need to own that problem. I bring others in who can help me with that. And it's no good just buying an answer. You've got to do the thinking and the work yourself.
Ollie, anything to add to that? I'm going to be at risk at saying ditto twice, I think.
I just think that's really, really helpful. I just think starting with oneself, one's purpose and one's direction, absolutely brilliant. And can I just say, look, thanks for your thoughts and your contributions. It's a brilliant way to end the series, and your time and your consideration is really, really appreciated. Thank you very much.
Well, that's most kind of you to say. I really appreciate you inviting me along.
That was Claire and I speaking to Nicola Jones of Athena Professional. Claire, fantastic conversation. What leapt out at you?
Yeah, what a great way to end the series and to tie it all together. This collaboration point, I think, is one that Nicola picked up on at the end, and for me, it's really been the theme of all of not just this series, but so many of the series that we've done, and this notion of, there's a real shift change happening in the legal industry, and in order for firms to get on board with it, in order for lawyers to get the most of it, lawyers need to change the way that they work. They need to embrace change, and they need to embrace working with others in a way that they perhaps haven't done to date.
And also break this billable hour concept that seems to be such a barrier for change in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I've done exercises with firms before, thinking about how you can get around the billable hour and moving, innovative ways of thinking about how you might charge or what clients might like. And it's amazing the way that, it still circles back to, we need to cling on to something that we all recognize is broken. And it's, it's a sad indictment of the profession where, Nicola mentioned there, lawyers are intelligent, that it's a problem that I'm sure the industry can solve if they want to. And I wonder whether that is the point. Do they want to?
Do they want to? Because maybe collaboration and the billable hour are polar opposites.
Ollie, I've really enjoyed this series with you. I'm looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, it's been great to meet so many different people to talk about behavioural skills and the impact of that on the profession. So yeah, it's been absolutely fascinating.
And also thanks to all our listeners for following us throughout this series. Goodbye, and we'll be back soon.
Absolutely. We'll see you all soon.
Lawyers Coach is brought to you by Client Talk and Hansard Coaching. If you're enjoying this series, please rate us on your podcast provider so that others can find us. If you're a lawyer and would like to take part in Lawyers Coach, please visit our website lawyercoach.co.uk for further details. And you can also join the conversation on our LinkedIn group Lawyers Coach. If there are any topics you'd like to hear us discuss, then just get in touch.